Alright, today we're going to look at absolute value equations and how to solve them. It's really important here that we remember what absolute value bars do. Okay, if you're looking at just a number in the absolute value bar, if I gave you the absolute value, and I don't have very much space to work with, but I'll do it here. If I gave you the absolute value of -3, the absolute value bar shows that I want to find the distance from 0. Okay, so how far is -3 from 0? It's important here that I say distance because distance is something that cannot be negative. Okay, whether I go to the left 3 meters or to the right 3 meters, I've gone 3 meters. Okay, so absolute value, if you remember it as distance, and that should remind you that it can never be a negative number. Okay, absolute value of -3 is just 3. Same goes, absolute value of 3 is 3. Okay, just the distance from 0. Alright, we're going to be solving the absolute value equations, and they kind of add a little bit to the problem because we will have more than one solution. So imagine that instead of saying -3 equals 3, I said x equals 3. Okay, if x equals 3, and like I have examples up here, well, if the absolute value of x equals 3, what could x be? Well, x could be 3, obviously. The absolute value of 3 is 3. But as we just said, x could also be -3. And so we'll look at solving problems with absolute values, kind of our strategies and processes that we'll go through to make sure that we get all the answers in into our final solutions. Okay. There are, I guess, 3 kind of solutions that you could have. You could have 2 solutions, like we just talked about here. We could have 1 solution, but you'll notice that the absolute value bar is no longer on our variable, it's on the other side. So if we set x equals the absolute value of -5, it would be 1 solution, it would just be 5. Or we could have no solutions, because absolute value cannot be negative. So if I said the absolute value of x is -5, well, you say, well, there's no value I can plug into this absolute value equation. That comes out to be negative, so there's no solution. Okay, we got to be very careful that when we're doing these problems that we stay thinking, because sometimes we get kind of into our, I don't know, doing something else or not really paying attention, and we let these slip past us. So make sure that we pay attention as we're going through these. Okay, so we'll go through a few of these, and then you should be prepared to solve any absolute value equation you see. This first problem, we have absolute value of x equals 16. This is what we want to do. We want to get our absolute value by itself. And then once the absolute value is by itself, we want to drop the absolute value bar and split the equation into a positive or a negative outcome. So with number 1, the absolute value is already by itself. We have the absolute value of x equals 16. There's nothing on this side with x. So I'm going to now say, okay, I want to take it out of its bar. X could be positive 16, or x could be negative 16. And this is a pretty simple problem because there wasn't anything that we need to do to isolate x, but this is what we want to do. So each problem, I think, will add on to what we need to do. So our answer is x equals 16 or negative 16. And we can say plus or minus 16 if you'd like. You can say 16 comma negative 16, either way. Okay, so now looking at number 2, we have the absolute value of x minus 5 equals 11. Okay, so now we need to get the absolute value by itself. It's the first thing we want to do. What's stopping it from being by itself? This minus 5. How do we get rid of it? Add 5. Add 5 to both sides. So when we do that, we're left with the absolute value of x equals 16. Okay, so same exact numbers here, but now that we have the absolute value by itself, we're saying, okay, x could be positive 16, but x could also be negative 16. Okay, so x equals 16 comma negative 16. Just writing it a different way. You could write it plus or minus 16 if you wanted to again. Okay, and I'll just go through these problems. I don't know if there'll be much need for commentary, but I'll just walk through each step. You can follow along here and rewind me or slow me down, pause me if you need more time. Here, getting the absolute value by itself. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. 7 equals the absolute value of W. Okay, absolute value by itself. Now, so I'm splitting it. W could be 7, but W could also be negative 7. So W could be plus or minus 7. Okay. For number 4, what's 4 doing to the absolute value of n? Well, it's multiplying. So how do I get rid of it? I divide. I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So I have the absolute value of n equals 8. Again, my absolute value is by itself, and so once that's true, I split it. N could be 8. N could also be negative 8. Alright, looking at number 5, what's stopping the absolute value from being by itself here? There's negative 2. What's negative 2 doing? It's dividing, so I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 2. Okay, just watch out for this because we're having an equal and negative right now. But negative 2 times negative 6 is positive 12. So absolute value of x equals positive 12. So that still works because our absolute value comes out to be a positive number. So x could either be 12 or negative 12. Okay, and it doesn't always happen that x is, positive of one number and negative of another. I think it's going to happen for these first 6 though. Maybe for these first 6. So number 6, again, we're trying to get our absolute value by itself. We're going to add 5 to each side. So we have the absolute value of x equals negative 4. Okay, and so hopefully this perks your ears up because you're like, wait. How's the absolute value equal a negative number? If you did that when I said that, you're right. An absolute value cannot equal a negative number. That's what we said up here. This will be no solution. So we have no solution. There is no number that we can plug in for x that would ever come out to be a negative number, let alone negative 4. Okay, so no solution here. Alright, so those are pretty simple. We got the variable or the absolute value bracket by itself and then split it to a positive and negative answer. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes there is an expression inside of the absolute value bracket. So let's look at those problems. Here we have x plus 9 equals 3, or absolute value of x plus 9 equals 3. So like I said, well, now, is there anything stopping the absolute value bracket from being by itself? Now you might say, oh yeah, the plus 9 is stopping the absolute value bracket from being by itself. But it's not. The plus 9 is not doing anything to stop the absolute value bracket. It's stopping x from being by itself. But that's not our question now. So the absolute value bracket is by itself. And so since that's the case, we're going to split this in 2 different possibilities. Either x plus 9 equals 3, or x plus 9 equals negative 3. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully you guys are all saying yes. Okay, and so now we're going to solve this problem. These problems, because there's 2 now. There's 2 possibilities. So x could equal 3 minus 9, which is negative 6. Or x could equal negative 3 minus 9, which is negative 12. And so there are our solutions. Number 8, we have p plus 3 minus 4, the absolute value of p plus 3 minus 4 equals 0. So our first step will be to get the absolute value bracket by itself. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. The absolute value p plus 3 equals 4. Okay, so our absolute value comes out to be a positive number, so we can do that. So now we split it. We have p plus 3 equals 4, or p plus 3 equals negative 4. Okay, hopefully that's routine by now, but if not, by the end of tonight's homework it will be. And so now we just solve each equation. And solving these equations shouldn't be anything too noteworthy. It's just two-step, three-step equations, okay? So the big part that I want you guys to take from this is being able to set up and solve this problem, this part of the problem. Splitting it and understanding that the absolute value can be a positive or negative outcome. Okay, so I subtract 3 from both sides, and I get p could equal negative 7. And so here are our two solutions. P could be 1, P could be negative 7. Now after doing these problems, I just want to point out something. This gets confused a lot. I always have somebody say, Mr. Middleton, I thought we couldn't get a negative answer. That is not true. We can have negative answers. Notice what happens with these negative answers. Negative 12, if x is negative 12, we get negative 12 plus 9, which equals negative 3. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. See, that works out. That's exactly what we said up here. We can have x equal negative 3. That works out. What we cannot have happen is that our absolute value equal a negative number. That's what we can't have happen. This is no solution because the absolute value will always come out to be positive. That's why it's no solution. So we can have a negative x value as long as the absolute value comes out to a positive number. Okay? Okay. Alright, so it says Jeff estimates his strides is 16 inches. However, any given stride is likely to vary from this estimate by up to, I'll say that says 2. By up to 2 inches. Write an equation to solve, write and solve an equation to find Jeff's minimum and maximum stride length. Okay. So let's try to set that up, and then I'll have an answer for you in the next video.